Get in the house, you're turning blue, the rancher said, throwing his coat over them. Wyoming Territory, late December 1884. The wind came howling off the mountains like it had a score to settle. Snow whipped across the prairie in sheets, erasing the world in white. There were no roads out here, only fence lines, horse tracks, and memories buried deep beneath the frost. Somewhere between Roland's and the edge of nowhere stood a lonely cabin, weathered by time and silence. Jonas Aldrich had lived alone on that land for 7 winters now. He did not keep a calendar anymore. He counted time in fence posts and firewood, in the deepening lines at the corner of his eyes, and in the sound of his own boots echoing through empty halls. Once he had been engaged to a girl named Clara. She died of winter fever before the snow thawed that year. Since then, Jonas only spoke to his horses and the wind. Neither ever talked back. This afternoon he was out mending the southern fence, coat buttoned to the neck, hat low over his brow, when something moved on the ridgeline. Not deer, not wind, 2 figures, small, unsteady. He dropped his tools, heart kicking once in his chest. As they staggered closer, he saw it clearer. A woman no more than 30, clutching something, someone in her arms. A child, maybe 3 years old. Both were near frozen, their faces wind-burned, their clothes stiff with ice. Jonas moved fast. Get in the house, you're turning blue, he said, voice low and urgent as he threw his heavy sheepskin coat over them. The woman didn't answer. Her knees buckled as they reached the porch. She fell forward onto the wood planks, arms still wrapped around the child. Ma'am. Jonas knelt, lifting the girl from her arms. Ma'am. No response. He looked down at the child. Her lips were blue, her cheeks flushed, dangerously red. Come on now, he whispered, standing with the girl in one arm and lifting the woman with the other. Let's get you warm. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine, smoke, and old leather. Jonas set the child on the thick rug near the fireplace and gently laid the woman on his cot. Without thinking, he yanked off his gloves and dropped to his knees beside the girl. He rubbed her tiny face with the flat of his palm, careful but insistent, trying to chase warmth back into her skin. Come on, little one. Stay with me, he murmured. His hands trembled, not from the cold, from memory. He saw Clara's face pale and still from another winter long ago, her body cooling in his arms. While he begged her not to leave, his voice broke into a whisper. Don't be like her. Please don't. But no one heard. The fire popped behind him. Wind clawed at the door. He glanced over his shoulder at the woman. She was deathly still, lips parted slightly, skin white as linen. Jonas swallowed hard. He stepped toward her, placing 2 fingers gently at her throat. No pulse. He staggered back, breath caught in his lungs. No, he said aloud this time, voice raw. Not again. The child stirred. Her small hand reached out blindly, clutching the air where her mother had been. Jonas went to her, pulled her close, and wrapped them both in a blanket. He stared at the woman, motionless on his bed, and for the first time in 7 years, he didn't feel alone. He felt responsible. The storm raged outside, but inside that cabin, something had already broken open, and it had nothing to do with weather. The next morning, the storm had passed in the night, leaving behind a white world, quiet as the inside of a church. Frost clung to the windows like lace. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low, but the warmth remained thanks to Jonas, who had stayed awake, feeding it wood and listening for signs of breath. Just past dawn, the woman stirred. She coughed, a dry, tight sound that echoed too loud in the silence. Her fingers moved first, then her eyes opened, wide, brown, and clouded with confusion. Jonas was by the stove ladling soup into a tin bowl. He turned as he heard her shift. Her gaze darted around the room toward the cot, the fireplace, the log walls before landing on the small bundle asleep on the rug beside her. Leela, she rasped, sitting up too fast. Easy now, Jonas said quietly, crossing the room. She's all right, sleeping warm. The woman's shoulders dropped just a little. She touched her daughter's hair, then leaned back with a sharp breath. I am sorry, she said hoarsely. I didn't mean to trouble you. Jonas shook his head. You didn't. She tried to sit straighter, but winced. Jonas stepped forward, steadying her by the elbow. Careful, gentle, like the memory of a man who'd once loved someone fragile. You need rest, food first. I should go. You'll do no such thing, he replied. Storm's not done with these hills yet. She hesitated, eyes scanning him, still guarded. Jonas could see the weight behind them. Not just exhaustion, but something older. Fear, maybe, or shame. He set the bowl of soup down on the table and turned back to the girl. Leia was stirring, cheeks pink now, eyes blinking open. Jonas knelt beside her and offered a soft smile. Morning, little miss. He lifted the bowl again and without thinking blew on the surface of the soup before handing it to her, just like he used to for Clara, a motion so familiar it hurt. The girl took it with small hands and murmured, "Thank you." The mother, Elena, he would soon learn, watched every movement. When she tried to stand to offer thanks, her knees buckled slightly. Jonas was there again, catching her just above the elbow, his grip feather light. No need for that, he said. You're safe here. She nodded barely. Elena Ward, she said finally. My name, Jonas Aldridge. A quiet settled between them. They sat in the warmth of the fire. The wind moaned faintly outside, but inside was still. Jonas poured water into a basin and offered her a clean cloth. She wiped her face and hands slowly with the caution of someone unused to being tended to. After a time, he asked, How long were you out in it? She hesitated, then replied, We lost our horse. Been walking near a week, I think. Jonas frowned. You come through the south trail. She shook her head, avoiding his eyes. We kept to the tree. Away from the roads. Jonas paused, sensing the silent stretch. That's a rougher way to travel. I know. He didn't press her further, not yet. But something unsettled curled inside him. Later, when she dozed again, he gathered her coat from the chair where it had dried. As he folded it to set near the fire, something caught his eye. Faint marks near the shoulder seam. He turned it slightly in. Light, bruises, finger marks, dark, deliberate. Jonas stared down at the fabric in his hands, jaw tightening. Whatever Elena Ward was running from, it was not just winter. Night settled deep and cold, pressing against the cabin walls like a second silence. The fire crackled low in the hearth, casting flickers of orange across the wooden floor. Outside, the wind had calmed, but the cold held fast, thick as iron. Jonas sat at the table with his hands around a tin mug of coffee gone lukewarm. He had not spoken much since supper. Elena sat across from him, eyes lowered, one hand absently brushing through Leia's hair as the girl lay curled asleep beside her on the cot. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was waiting. Finally, Elena spoke. My husband's name was Thomas, she said, voice rough with wear. He worked the west shaft of the whitest stone mine. Always came home covered in dust, but smiling. Jonas looked up slowly. She kept her eyes on the fire. 6 months ago. The shaft collapsed, took 6 men. They said Thomas died quick, crushed before he even heard it coming. Jonas said nothing, but his jaw twitched. Elena's hand paused on Leia's curls, after he passed. I tried to make it on my own. Took in laundry, helped at the canteen, but it wasn't enough. Then Barlow Creed came calling. The name dropped into the room like a stone into water. He owns the mine. Owns half the county, really said Thomas owed him still. Some debt never spoken of. He told me I could work it off. Her lips curled slightly in bitterness. Said a woman like me could be useful. Pretty enough to stand by him, quiet enough to obey. Jonas's fingers tightened around his mug. When I refused, she continued, her voice smaller now. He said I was being ungrateful, that no one else would taken a widow with a child and no coin. The next day, 2 of his men came to our door. Jonas's eyes darkened. They never laid hands on Leah. I made sure of that, but they tried to make me understand what saying no would cost. So, I took what little we had, and we ran. Her voice cracked on the last word. We walked at night, hid during the day, crossed state lines. I thought maybe, just maybe, if we made it far enough, he would let us go. Jonas leaned back in his chair, fists clenched, the knuckles gone white. Not at her, at the kind of world that swallowed good men in mines, and let devils like Barlow Creed wear fine coats. He stood and crossed to the cot. Leah had kicked the blanket halfway off. He bent down, gently pulled it up over her shoulders, then paused. Instead of the usual quilt, he laid his own sheepskin coat over her, the same one he had not touched since Clara died, the one he could never bring himself to let go. His voice was low, but sure. No one harms anyone in this house. Elena looked at him, her eyes shining in the firelight. This isn't my house, she whispered. Jonas held her gaze. Tonight it is. They said nothing more. The fire snapped and shifted, shadows dancing across the wooden beams. A long moment passed before Jonas stepped to the window, drawn by a strange flicker beyond the trees. He narrowed his eyes. Far off on the ridge, above the northern trail, a glow moved. Orange, unsteady, too still for lightning and too high for a campfire. A lantern, maybe 2. Someone was out there, searching. Jonas's hand went instinctively to the rifle by the door. The danger Elena had outrun was not gone. It was catching up. Late morning sun spilled pale light across the snow, but the cold hadn't eased. Frost clung to the windows in jagged shapes, and the wind moved slower now, not howling, just watching. Jonas was splitting, kindling near the shed when he heard it. Hooves, 2 sets, crunching through crusted snow. He stood still, axe lowered. 2 riders emerged from the trees, dark coats, wide hats. They moved like men used to giving orders and getting what they wanted. Jonas wiped his hands on his trousers and walked toward the front of the cabin, slow and even. The riders stopped a few feet from the porch. You the one lives here? The taller one asked. His mustache was iced over, his voice dry and sure. I am, Jonas said flatly. We're looking for someone. The second man added, glancing toward the windows. A woman, late 20s, has a kid, girl, maybe 3. Jonas didn't blink. Haven't seen anyone, he said. You sure about that? The tall one asked. Snow's fresh. We saw prints leading this direction. Jonas met his eyes calm as still water. I said, I haven't seen anyone. The men exchanged a glance. The second one leaned slightly in his saddle. She's trouble, Mr. Running with stolen property. Her kid too, probably not even hers. Jonas didn't move. His hands hung loose at his sides, but one stayed close to the deep pocket of his coat, where the cold iron of an old Colt revolver waited. Mind if we take a look around? The taller one asked, voice casual but edged. I do mind, Jonas said. They stared at him for a long beat. Then the second man spat into the snow. All right, we'll be back, he said with more eyes. Maybe you remember something by then. They turned their horses and trotted off, snow kicking up behind them. Jonas watched them disappear into the trees. Only then did he exhale. Inside, Elena was near the hearth, arms wrapped around herself, knuckles white. Her whole body shook, not from cold, but from the fear she had held too long. Jonas stepped in and saw her trembling. He reached out, touched her shoulder lightly, then pulled back, unsure. Then he placed his hand again, firmer now. You're all right, he said. They're gone. But her shoulders didn't stop shaking. Jonas looked at Leah, who was clutching a piece of bread, watching her mother with wide, quiet eyes. Come on, little one, he said softly. Let's see the horses. He scooped her up, wrapped her in a blanket, and carried her to the barn. Inside it was warmer, the scent of hay and leather thick in the air. He walked with her between the stalls, showing her the gray mare and the old mule. She looked up at him. Is Mama okay? she asked. Jonas knelt to her level, brushing her hair back from her face. She's just tired, he said gently. You don't need to be scared. Not here, okay, Leia whispered, leaning into him. They stayed there a while, long enough for the storm inside the cabin to quiet. When Jonas returned, Elena was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face blotched, eyes red. She didn't speak, and he didn't ask her to. That afternoon, Jonas stood alone on the porch, watching the trail disappear into the hills. He saw the hoof prints, 2 sets, now deeper on the return, and knew they would not be the last. More were coming. He reached into his pocket and felt the weight of the colt. The snow creaked beneath his boots as he stepped off the porch and started stacking logs by the fence. It was time to prepare. The next days passed in a hush like the quiet before thunder. The snow didn't fall, but the cold deepened, settling into the bones of the cabin. Inside, something else had begun to settle too. Not dread, not yet, but a rhythm, a new shape to the silence. Jonas took Elena out behind the barn at dawn. This ain't for hunting, he said, handing her the colt. It's for drawing breath one more day. Elena's hands trembled as she took the pistol. He noticed, but said nothing. He stood behind her, adjusted her grip gently, just enough to guide without touching too long. Her body stiffened at first, but then she found steadiness in her stance. He nodded. Again, he said. The sound of gunfire cracked against the frozen trees. Inside the cabin, Elena swept out years of dust. She repaired the torn curtain over the east window with thread she found in the back drawer. She folded quilts, sorted tin plates, stacked firewood in neat lines beside the hearth. Bit by bit, the place began to breathe again, not as a shelter, but as a home. Leia danced between them both, singing to the dog that wasn't there, and chasing sunbeams on the floor. She'd taken to calling Jonas, the tall uncle, her words soft and lilting. Uncle Tall, are you a cowboy? Jonas chuckled, actually chuckled. A sound so unfamiliar he stopped himself halfway through. Elena heard it from the other room, and for a moment everything felt lighter. That night after Leia fell asleep, curled in the big armchair, Elena stood in the doorway and watched Jonas at the mantel. He was staring at a photograph, faded, sepia-toned, curled at the edges, a young woman with kind eyes and a winter scarf. Jonas held it for a long while, then quietly turned it face down on the shelf. Elena said nothing. She didn't need to. Later, the wind picked up again. Jonas stepped out, wrapped his scarf and gloves, and turned back to find Elena by the door, holding another scarf, hers, thin and worn. Without a word, he reached out and wrapped his around her neck instead. The motion was slow, deliberate. His fingers brushed her collarbone, lingered a second longer than they should have. Their eyes met, then quickly looked away. Neither spoke. The next morning, Jonas was hammering a small wooden sign into the post beside the barn. It was nothing fancy, just old pine and careful letters carved by knife. Law's pony reserved. Elena leaned against the fence, watching him. She does not have a pony, she said. Not yet. Jonas replied, not. Looking up, he smiled, and Elena felt something in her chest shift. Something she hadn't let move in a long time. Near noon, the postman arrived on a tall sorrel horse, bundled against the wind. A letter came through Fort Steele, he said, handing over a crumpled note. Figured it might matter. Jonas read it silently, jaw tightening with each word. He folded the paper slowly and looked toward the hills. They're coming, he said. Barlow, 15 men, maybe more. He rides at dawn. Elena gripped the edge of the porch rail. Jonas looked at her, his voice steady but low. I need you and Leia in root cellar at first light. She didn't nod. She just reached for his hand, and for the first time he let someone hold it. Jonas worked through the night with no words, only motion. He fortified the porch rails with timber, stacked barrels at angles to block sightlines, and nailed boards over the south window. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he moved, methodical, eyes distant, the eyes of a man who had nothing left to lose, but now had someone he would die to protect. Before dawn, he opened the trapdoor beneath the wood pile and helped Elena and Leia down into the root cellar. It Smelled of earth and potatoes, but it was dry and hidden. He gave Alina his second pistol wrapped in a wool scarf. If they get past me, he said, you run through the north tunnel. Don't wait, don't look back. Alina touched his sleeve. You do not have to do this alone. I already am, he said. But I don't have to lose anyone else. He closed the trapdoor before she could answer. As the first line of gray crept over the hills, they came. 15 men on horseback, guns slung low, faces wrapped in scarves and cold fury. At their head, Barlow Creed, smug in a buffalo coat, his eyes glittering with triumph. They stopped at the edge of the property. Jonas stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, alone. Barlow raised a hand. We just want the girl, Aldridge, he called. No need for blood. Jonas didn't blink. She ain't yours. She's mine by debt. She ran with what belongs to me. Jonas leveled the rifle. Then come and take it. There was a beat of silence, then gunfire. The first shots cracked like thunder. Wood splintered from the porch railing as bullets struck. Jonas dropped to one knee and returned fire. His aim steady, his breathing calm. 2 riders fell. A third staggered back behind a tree, screaming. Jonas moved quickly, shifting between cover, firing with purpose. He knew every inch of this land, every angle of that porch. He used it all, but numbers catch up. A shot tore through his shoulder. Another grazed his thigh. He grunted, stumbling against the post. Blood soaked through his coat, dark and fast. Still, he fought. Even as pain surged, Jonas's eyes darted, not toward his enemies, but toward the base of the barn. He needed to see that the cellar door was still closed, still hidden. He found it, still shut. That gave him strength. Another shot rang out. He dropped behind the barrel stack, panting, hand pressed tight to the wound in his side. From behind the smoke and shouting, a voice rose. Alina Ward, Barlow's voice, close now. You come out now, or I'll dig you out. Jonas tried to rise, too slow. The cellar door burst open. No, Jonas rasped, but the wind stole his voice. Alina had emerged, running to him, a gun cocked. Barlow stepped forward, grabbed her by the arm, yanked her hard against him, his revolver pressed against her temple. Jonas struggled to his feet, barely upright, blood dripping from his coat sleeve. She's not yours, he said, voice but clear. She belongs to no man. She belongs to herself. She belongs to freedom. Barlow sneered. You can't even stand. Then shoot me, Jonas said. But you won't walk off this porch alive. Before Barlow could answer, a small voice cut through the morning. Mommy, Leia, she had crawled out barefoot in the snow, her dress dragging behind her. Barlow turned his head just an inch. That was all Jonas needed. With a roar that was more pain than sound, he surged forward, drove his shoulder into Barlow, knocked the gun wide. It fired into the air. Alina broke free, diving toward Leia. Jonas wrestled the weapon from Barlow's grip, smashed the butt of his rifle into the man's jaw once, twice, until Barlow crumpled into the snow. Around them, the rest of the men hesitated, seeing their leader down, hearing the cries, the gunfire, the fury of one man against many. They turned. One by one, they fled, horses thundering back into the trees, vanishing like ghosts in daylight. Jonas dropped to his knees, breath ragged, blood pooling fast. But the war, for now, was over. The cabin was quiet now. The battle had ended hours ago, but its echoes still lived in every breath of wind and every drip of melting snow from the eaves. Blood stained the porch, the steps, and Jonas's shirt, thick and dark where it had dried across his ribs. He lay on the cot, shirt torn open, jaw clenched against the pain as Alina leaned over him, sewing needle trembling between her fingers. I've stitched up old coats, she whispered, breath hitching. Not people. You're doing fine, Jonas rasped. Alina blinked fast, forcing the tears back. Her hands were steady, but her heart wasn't. The wound on his side was deep, ugly. He had taken it, shielding her. She tied the last knot in silence, then leaned back, pressing a cloth to the fresh stitches. Her palms were stained with his blood. "You should rest," Jonas murmured. Elena didn't move. Her eyes searched his face as if afraid he might vanish if she looked away. "You almost died," she said. Jonas let out a breath, part sigh, part grim amusement. "Wouldn't be the first time I thought I might." She didn't smile. He looked at her, then truly looked, her face streaked with dirt and ash, her fingers raw from the fight, her heart laid bare. The room was dim, firelight flickering across the walls, but it felt like nothing could hide in this moment. "I wanted you gone," he said quietly. Elena flinched. He shook his head. "Not because of you, because I was afraid. Losing Clara broke me. I didn't know if I could bear to lose anything again. Anyone." She stared at him. Jonas turned his head, eyes finding the low beam above the door, his voice soft as a confession. "Every time Leia laughed, every time you looked at me like I mattered, it scared the hell out of me. I'd rather be alone than bury another person I care about." Elena reached for his hand, took it. "I thought about leaving," she said, "more than once, even after you saved us." Jonas's brow lifted slightly. "But then I remembered the first thing you did," she continued, voice trembling. "You didn't ask who I was or why I was running. You just put your coat over us like it was nothing, like it was instinct." She placed her other hand on his chest, right over an old scar, one healed by time, but never softened. "From that moment," she whispered, "I knew I could trust you." The fire cracked behind them. Wind brushed the window panes like a sigh. Jonas closed his eyes, not from pain, but from the weight of everything unsaid. Finally lifting, he reached up, fingers brushing a lock of hair from Elena's cheek. Then his gaze shifted to the cot where Leia now slept, curled into a wool blanket, her tiny hand resting on her stuffed cloth horse. Jonas extended his arm slowly and touched her hair, a gesture so gentle it barely stirred a strand. His eyes softened, and something in him seemed to unshackle, the steel in his chest melting just a little. "I never thought I'd have this again," he said, mostly to himself. Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. "You're not alone anymore." They stayed that way, listening to the hush of the night and the slow, steady rhythm of a world that for the first time in years did not feel like it was closing in, but opening up. The snow had begun to melt. Small patches of earth peeked through the white, and the fence posts Jonas once mended in silence now echoed with the sound of laughter, light, high-pitched, and impossibly full of life. It had been a month since the shootout, a month since blood was spilled on the porch, and the weight of 7 winters began to lift from Jonas Aldridge's shoulders. He had healed slowly, the wound in his side still itched in the cold, but he wore the pain like an old coat, familiar, not feared, and he was never alone. Elena had stayed. She had never said she would. Not in words, but she began by scrubbing the cabin floors, patching the old curtains, and cooking stew that made the walls smell like home. She helped mend fences, tied bundles of hay, and hung laundry to dry on a rope between the posts. Leia ran wild across the fields, her laughter bouncing off the hills, calling life back to a place that had forgotten how to breathe. Each day, Jonah watched them, not with caution, but with quiet wonder, like a man who'd spent too long in darkness and was learning how to live in light again. One evening, just as the sun dipped low behind the ridge, Elena stood at the edge of the porch, shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the horizon. He knew that look. He stepped outside, his footsteps slow but sure. "You thinking of leaving?" he asked gently. She didn't turn. I didn't want to overstay." Jonas swallowed, the wind tugging at his coat. "Elena," he said, voice low, This house, it stood here a long time, but it's never felt like anything more than walls and wood. She looked down, he stepped closer. It wasn't complete, he continued. Not until you and Leia walked through that storm and into my life. She turned, her eyes already glistening. Jonas, don't go, he said simply. That was all. No grand speeches, no promises he couldn't keep, just truth stripped bare. Tears broke from her eyes, trailing down her cheeks in silence. At that moment, the door swung open behind them. Leia came bounding out, arms flailing with excitement. Are we staying here always, Uncle Jonas? She asked, breathless. Jonas crouched, wincing slightly from the healing wound, and met her gaze. If your mama says yes, he said, smiling, then this is your home. Leia clapped her hands, threw herself at him in a hug, and darted off toward the barn to chase a chicken. Elena stood frozen, lips parted, chest rising and falling like she had just remembered how to breathe. Jonas stood, pulling something from his coat pocket. It was small, a simple ring of smooth wood, carved with care, worn with age. He had made one just like it once long ago for a woman named Clara. He had hung it above the door with her name carved inside, but that one had been burned years ago during the second winter when the pain had been too much. Now he handed a new one to Elena, not on bended knee. Not with a question, just a gesture. The names carved into the grain read, Elena and Leia, home. She took it in trembling hands, staring at it like it was something sacred. Her thumb brushed over the lettering and her breath caught in her throat. Jonas reached out, touching her back with quiet strength, guiding her toward the door. As it creaked open, he stood behind her, one hand on Elena's shoulder, the other resting protectively behind Leia's small frame. And together they crossed the threshold. Not as guests, not as survivors, but as something far rarer in the wild country, a family. And that's the story of how one lonely rancher, a mother on the run, and a little girl with a big heart turned a frozen cabin into a home. Sometimes love does not arrive with fireworks or grand speeches. It comes with a coat thrown over cold shoulders, a name carved into wood, and a quiet voice that says, "You're not alone anymore." If this story touched your heart, make sure to hit that like button to let us know. Tap subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a tale from the untamed heart of the American frontier. More stories of forbidden love, wild courage, and redemptive endings are coming your way, only here on Wild West Love Stories, where bullets missed but hearts didn't.